Hello, and welcome to BIA's Leading Local Insights podcast, your go-to spot for staying ahead in the dynamic local advertising marketplace. You'll hear BIA's top experts and their distinguished guests break down the trends, technologies, and innovations reshaping local media. Plus, you'll frequently get highlights from BIA's U.S. local advertising forecast. Thanks for tuning in. Let's dive in.
Welcome to BIA's Leading a Local podcast, where we talk about things that are happening in the local advertising, media, and agency and client space. Today, we're going to be talking about political crowd out as we get closer to the political season. We've already faced some of this in the early part of the season, and we've got the elections coming up soon. Political crowd out is what happens when TV stations have to reserve inventory for political candidates 45 days out and 60 days out from the early elections, and then you get into the general elections as well. So we're talking about a lot of money. Today, we're going to be hearing about this from a few different perspectives. First, I'd like to introduce Todd Wiseman, who has started a new column for TV News Check, coming up with really interesting insights and information about different aspects of the media industry. And this podcast episode actually was inspired, Todd, by your column on what is happening with political crowd out and its impact on local businesses. A lot of us in this space think about what's happening on the media and the candidate campaign and agency side of things, but we kind of forget about, well, the hometown businesses, the local businesses, the multi-locational regional businesses. They get impacted too, because they literally get crowded out. The inventory goes at lowest unit rate, and demand, depending upon the market you're in, is pretty high. And so you can't be on TV for a couple of different periods in this political season. So we're going to talk about that. Todd, we're going to hear some of your thoughts, and then what size are we talking about? How much money and how is it being spent? Where is it all going? So we've also got John Link from Ad Impact, who has worked with CBS political sales, and now as Ad Impact to talk about the dimensions of this market and kind of the dynamics that are going on. And then also from BIA, we have our own Senan Mele, who is VP of Forecasting, who will talk about not just what has been spent or is being spent, but what it looks like going forward in this marketplace. So let me just come back and say a few more words about Todd as I invite you to kind of kick things off here. Todd's founder of Riptide Creative and Advertising, which is a full-service ad agency. Todd, you've been in the business for 25 years, media and ad side. You've worked with over 4,000 local, regional, and national marketing campaigns, coming up to over $500 million worth of revenue. And you've specialized in different verticals: legal, home improvement, automotive, franchise, healthcare, and of course, for today's topic, political, which we're particularly excited to hear about. So let me start off with you. You recently wrote this column for TV News Check, Ghost Towns of Local TV, How Political Windfalls Are Killing Main Street Advertising. And here your point is that local TV stations are huge beneficiaries of political ad spending. We at BIA talk about kind of the piano key spending, where in even years where there's a political event happening, either midterms or general elections, a lot of money goes to TV stations. And so they like that. But that money is being spent on inventory that therefore other advertisers like local businesses can't get to. It's too expensive, or it's sold. It's really hard to get into the local news, for example. So the point of your article is that the notion of political crowd out is impacting local businesses, and what can we do about that? So can you share some of the thoughts you had in that column and generally what you see happening with this notion of political crowd out and its impact on local businesses?
Sure, and good to be here, Rick. Thank you for the invitation. It's painful for the local advertisers. We know the political season is coming, and we would plan our annuals and our quarterlies ahead of time and say, your rate is going to have to be X in order for you to run during this political window. But a lot of times they just don't run. They move the money somewhere else. And that's not the problem with that is broadcast television is still an excellent vehicle for getting results, especially if you're targeting adults 35 plus and in certain categories. they need it, and they have to go dark. Their lead source goes dark for 45 days, right? Sometimes 60 days. And the bad thing for the television stations is that the political LUR, the lowest unit rate, is hurting us. Hurting the TV stations. We're making more money on the local furniture store, the home improvement company, the car advertisers. We make more money with that, and actually the revenue is much lower that we're forced to eat with political. Now we do make that up, and I'm sure you all understand the PAC money, right? When the PAC money comes in, we don't have to give them lowest unit rate, and in fact, we absolutely crush them on rates. So, as an example, we might get $500 in the Today Show, $1,000, whatever it is, 500, easy math, and we sold someone a spot that year for $200. So now the LUR is 200. When the PAC money comes, we take them to the highest level. So that $500 spot, we now charge $5,000 or $6,000 or whatever we can get. And that's a whole different topic. So there's ways to kind of make up the money, but again, the local advertisers are hurting, and it does. And there are sales reps that they're on commission, right? These are local AEs are on commission, and their book of business is gone for that month. And the stations act like they're going to help out in making sure these guys are taken care of, but they're really not. It's just it's a problem. So not take this too long. The solution, as we'll get to in the end, is to limit the number of spots a particular candidate can take on any given day or in any given campaign. I'm not saying they can't take it, but you can't. They can't take it all. You can't go crazy, right? We have to limit the number of spots that the low LUR is allowed to take. After you hit that limit, you got to pay the rate. Whatever rate we tell you, you have to pay it.
And who's going to be setting that limit, Todd?
Say that again.
In your view here, who sets that limit and limits the inventory for the PACs? For LUR for candidate advertising, we have to give them what they want. That is the law, right? Exactly.
So that law has to change in order for the stations to benefit from that.
Is that,
and the advertising?
We're not lawyers here, I don't think, but is that the FCC or Congress that does that? I mean, we've seen
Congress.
The national cap rule change. Some people thought that was Congress's turf, but Chairman Carr went ahead and changed that rule. So who knows, right?
Yeah, I think it's Congress.
Yeah.
They're controlling their own destiny as best they can, and they want the lowest unit rate, which is fine. And we do make a lot of it up with the PACs. But again, the purpose of the article is to say this is a problem for local advertisers. So the furniture stores can't advertise their sales. The personal injury lawyers can't be top of mind. The guy who's selling, the bathroom remodel, who depends on the direct response of that, or the GLP guy selling weight loss, they have to be on. That's where they get their business. And these other avenues work okay, but not as well as broadcast television.
Right. So let me turn to you and have you share some of the data you've been working with. So Senan, you're Vice President of Forecasting Data Analysis for us here at BIA Advisory Services. You direct our forecasting programs across 18 different media channels. Today we're focusing on TV over-the-air, local TV stations, but political advertising is acquired in a number of the different media channels. Social video and others have been particularly important lately. And then our forecast brings it down to each of the 210 local markets, and we always focus on local advertising. And before you joined us at BIA, you worked in the agency side doing media cost forecasting at companies like Horizon and working for brand clients, Electronic Arts and Procter & Gamble, helping to shape their media strategy. So you've come at this from a little bit of a different background, but I wonder if you could share some aspects of the forecast you've been building. And I know you're just finishing up our latest update of a forecast, so we're sort of in this transition period. But to the extent you have some numbers, can you just kind of quantify that difference between political years, non-political years, and where you see this midterm kind of election year with the primaries and then the general election coming up? How is the money happening from a forecasting perspective? What do you see looking ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So the way political code out looks like in our forecast is that it really changed the revenue mix of local television during an election year. So in 2026, BIA forecast TV OTA to grow by about 15% from roughly 15 billion to 17 billion. But most, if not all of that increase, I guess I'll say most of that increase is coming from political advertising. And our political heavy category rise from roughly 1 billion in 2025 to about, let's say, almost 4 billion in 2026, which really increase the share of political advertising from within TV OTA from roughly 7% to 21%. So that shows the dramatic increase in political ad spend that happened during election years, especially toward TV OTA. And all the while, core commercial TV OTA spend, meaning spend coming from over local businesses, actually declined by roughly 2% based on our estimate. Looking in terms of dollars, though, that is a significant decline in advertising spend. And where I think this is important is that while the TV OTA core spend, right, the spend coming from local business, while that's declining, BI is also forecasting local advertising, excluding political, to grow by about 3.8% as a whole, including all of the other media. So what this means is that those businesses are not necessarily disappearing. They are just reallocating their spend when as much as they are able to toward other media, some of which being CTV, OTT, social video, digital video, and search. So the point here is that political advertising does create code out, as Todd has mentioned, and it does lead local businesses to have to find other alternative to get inventory, and this is reallocating the spend toward other media. Let me know if that answers your question.
Yep, it does. And there's a couple of things I want to come back to in a bit, but John, first I want to get you into this discussion as well. So John, I mentioned Senior Vice President of Data at Ad Impact. You've got experience kind of on the selling side, and we BIA, I guess in disclosure, people know, I guess, that we've been collaborating with Ad Impact from data views, and we share through our platform some of the Ad Impact data that we find so valuable. And then Sinan and John work together closely. But we love what Ad Impact has brought to the market, and not just the data, but also some of the thinking behind the data to really help contextualize it and give it a little bit more power and meaning as people try to figure out what the heck's going on with all this political spending. But from your sense, I mean, you've got a pretty rigorous methodology at Ad Impact, and the models you've been building always evolving, as we know on our side. There's a British statistician and member of parliament whose name I always forget. I think it might be George Box, who said, all forecasts are wrong, but some are useful. So those of us in the forecasting business strive to at least be useful and always trying to get better. But tell us a bit about your view of the political broadcast market, particularly TV. And I know we're all struggling trying to understand CTV, which has some transparency and data issues, but that's a fast growth medium in its whole business too, of political broadcasting and advertising. So what are you guys up to, and what are you seeing over at Ad Impact?
Thanks, Rick. And yeah, I think as anybody who tries to prognosticate just tries to be right enough, I think is the barometer at times. But there's a couple nuances here, right? We always have what we're seeing cycle over cycle is generally new records in terms of total spending. What I mean by that, if you look at the presidential cycle that we came off of just, I mean, gosh, a year and a half ago at this point, we certainly set a new spending record. We then came into a midterm where we eliminated about $3 billion of presidential spending. But even with that, we are anticipating seeing another record-setting year, about 11.6 billion, which would represent the highest cycle ever, regardless of presidential or midterm. Now, with all of that money, obviously there's more eyes, there's more opportunity. And you are correct. There's a lot of nuance here in terms of how this is going to impact traditional advertisers and how do the political advertisers play in that space. I think the one thing to focus on here, though, is that with this cycle, the uniqueness of it is that about 50% of the overall spend is going to be condensed into about 10 states. So within those 10 states, think of it as, maybe have like 50, 60 markets, something like that. So those are going to be the states and markets in the DMAs that are significantly impacted, right? From a rate level, unit rate level perspective. Todd, you talked about sort of that squeeze out and those folks that rely on linear television not being able to get as much or any of it as possible. So I do think if you're within those 10 states, 10, 11 states, let's say, you have to be judicious and careful in terms of your approach. It's not going to impact as much out of the states. There's certainly going to be impact and it'll be selective impact. But I think the core focus here is that to really focus in on what your footprint looks like. And it's going to be different state by state, market by market. That's one of the unique things. And then behind it all, there are ways to sort of counterbalance that. I think the fear here is that if these traditional advertisers can't see that linear impressions or can't see those linear impressions, do they go to an OTA, CTV space, right? And if they're there, do they come back, and do they come back at the pace that linear folks want them to come back? So those are the things that we think about here at Ad Impact, and really try to provide some data points to help guide what we're seeing and then really what we could be seeing from a future perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the idea of the CTV, OTT, which the industry is trying to redefine again, I guess, video ad bureaus and IABs out there trying to help us understand whatever it is we think that means today. But yeah, I mean, I think, of course, the local TV stations sell CTV along with the best of them. So it's another channel that brings revenue into them, as well as, of course, being competitive with other entities bringing CTV inventory into these local markets. And the targetability for CTV is really interesting, of course, to the candidates, the campaigns, and the PACs, and so on. Do you, John, I want to stay with you for a second here, actually 2 seconds, but the next one is for the notion of crowd out. Do you have any visibility into who is getting crowded out for these businesses, particularly during those windows, 45 days for the primaries and the 60 days before the general election? Do they, who is it like, and Todd, obviously you have experience here too, but I mean, is it furniture stores? Is it, consumer products, or is it kind of across the board of all the different categories that just can't afford it, or it's not there to buy?
I'll take the first swing at that, Rick, and I would say anybody who's paying the lowest unit rate, right? If you're towards the bottom of that rate card, you're the susceptible entity. That could be the direct response folks who buy on a rotational basis and aren't guaranteed clearance. Those are probably the first to go. You probably see a little bit less of the station promos, those type of things. Broadcasters are certainly going to want to find inventory. You hit it on it as well, Rick. I would also offer another nuance is that we're really only talking about the general window, which is 60 days out of the election. I believe it's September 4th this year. So we're coming up on it. But you really have that sort of, condension of the spending within that time as well. I do think broadcasters were anticipating not only the change in the FCC ruling, which I think we're going to talk about, but also just the uptick in amount of pressure on inventory. So I do think broadcasters specifically have been planning on that, and I think digital broadcasters and sellers have been sort of anticipating trying to maneuver around some of that additional inventory as well.
Is that what you've been seeing, Todd? Also,
absolutely. Now the TV stations are smart, right? So there are workarounds. We've got LUR based on the time period. But, like you mentioned, John, you mentioned, ROS, but we might open a time period up that's not a traditional time period. So let's say that they're buying, the 6 to 7 a.m. news. We might open it up to 6 to 9 a.m. And I don't have an LUR for that, right? So we can work it out. And there are ways to get it done, but a lot of times, again, it comes down to there's a finite amount of inventory in each of these programs. So we can run all the tricks we want because we can get them in, but then what's left over, the packs come in and take it all, and the broadcasters are taking that money. I mean, it comes down to, I have no problem with LUR, no problem with PAC, I have no problem with any of it, but I do have a problem with unlimited number of spots that they can take. I mean, if it's me, I would force them to just political gets half the inventory, local keeps the other half. Broadcasters aren't going to go for that because they're, the guys at the top are making a lot of money on political. You're hearing the numbers. They might not agree to that, but I'm just saying, if you're a believer in local advertising and you don't want the ghost towns that I mentioned, and you don't want the local AEs to be out of business, there needs to be a happy medium. But I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah. So one thing, I guess, a shoe we have been waiting to drop has dropped. In the Supreme Court, there has been this case that was just decided, NRSC versus FEC. And the idea is there's a lot of money out there that could be spent, but it can't be coordinated with candidates. And so that keeps them out of the LUR part of the marketplace. Now, with the Supreme Court ruling that was just issued, that kind of coordination can happen. And so what does that mean for political advertising and revenue for broadcasters and the campaigns? If it can now be coordinated, there's going to be more demand, and that could be at the LUR. I know that, John, you've been thinking about this and writing about it. What's going to happen next here? What are people going to do about it?
Trickiest kind of, I probably know too much about this court case that I never wanted to know. The interesting part is, yeah, you're correct. Right around the end of June, the FEC overturned, or the Supreme Court, I should say, overturned the old expenditure limits, which was Colorado 2. That's been in place for, my goodness, 25 plus years. So it essentially had these really tiny caps. It was about $65K per house race and about $4 million per Senate. What that does now is it opens it up to this unlimited coordinated spending. Now, let's talk about the numbers, right? It really, if you look back at the past cycle, 2024, it represents about 7% of the potential money, right? And I'm talking about that being hybrid spend plus non-coordinated party spend. It's about 7% of the money that we saw in 2024. So if you look at 7% of $11.6 billion, while it's a huge aggregate figure, percentage-wise, it's not as impactful as you're going to think. It also is an opportunity. I would make the distinct argument. I think it's going to play out that we're going to see higher LURs than we've ever seen in past cycles, right?
Oh, interesting.
In the past, we talked about there was a 6 to 7A news mentioned, right? In the past, maybe that LUR would have come in at $350, $400 a unit. I think because of the demand and because of the increased demand with this ruling, you're going to see those LURs start to pop up. Now, you have to still manage that traditional inventory. Does that mean it's going to be tougher for those folks to clear? It may. There are ways to handle that, but I do think you're going to see increased LURs. I think you're going to see lower LUR clearances where those candidate and coordinated buys are going to have to go to higher levels or to non-preemptible levels to see the clearance that they want. It all has to happen so fast, right? It's all going to happen in 60 days. So after those 60 days, that money is no longer. So the TV stations have to figure out a way to get as much of that as they can within that time.
Yep. And Todd, I know you've been talking about this and thinking about this. What impact do you think this decision is going to have, and how can broadcasters, and I mean, you were talking about, let's partition the inventory, maybe the Congress does this, into, okay, it makes sense to have some kind of LUR inventory, which now have just increased the demand for that with the Supreme Court ruling, but some, broadcasters should still be allowed to control, so we can have a functioning marketplace for, the 2 months leading up to general and month and a half before primaries. That's a good chunk of the year. As you point out, John, that is in a concentration of a handful of markets, 10 or 12 markets, say, but it's still significant industry wide. Any other thoughts about this Supreme Court decision and its impact, opportunities, challenges that you're seeing, Todd?
Well, I think first I'd like to, John, you're correct. You're 100% correct on the LUR moving up, right? So with that limited inventory, when those spots are gone, they get preempted and they have to go up to the next level and the next level, and it keeps going. So as the pressure comes, the rates go up. But the broadcasters have no interest in trying to save the local market because they are making so much money on political. I can guarantee you that the conversations that the big broadcast owners have on Wall Street are, guess what's coming next year, right? And look at the numbers that BIA is predicting. This is going to be unbelievable, right? And that's what they want. I mean, they have to make money. They're making money. They're going to continue to make money. So, when I wrote my article, it was in defense of local, but there is no one on Wall Street or in any of these broadcasts that have any interest in worrying about that. They want political money, and they're counting on it. They're swinging from the chandeliers saying, look what's happened this year.
That's an interesting picture. So, Senden, let me come back to you. So you were talking about the current midterm, but you're also been working on what it looks like for the general election in 28. How have you been thinking about this Supreme Court decision, and how this is going to move forward for both this midterm cycle and maybe looking ahead to the general election?
Yeah, my approach here is really not to say that, okay, because of this decision, we will see X amount of dollar added nationally to the political landscape. Because like John and Todd have mentioned, the bigger issue is that it increases the ability of political buyers to access the inventory at favorable rates, and that puts more pressure on the finite broadcast inventory. So I think the effect will be highly market specific. And John has briefly alluded to that earlier on the nature of political spending, especially during this cycle. But we will probably see the impact of this decision specifically in markets that are highly competitive or toss-up. And other markets might kind of feel that impact, but not to the extent that we will see in markets that are very competitive. So to summarize, there will be a lot more political spending, but again, in this case, it will also be highly market specific. And it's going to be looking into, it's going to require looking into, okay, what was ad spend level in those key markets before and how that's changing after this decision has taken place to estimate what we can expect through the end of this year and in the future for future political cycles. So again, a market with competitive Senate race, governor's race, or several House races can experience dramatically more pressure than any other DMA. Now, the other issue with this is that, and I think Todd pointed this out earlier, local advertisers who are not political advertisers will likely have to find other media to reallocate their spend so that they can keep connecting with the audience, with their customers. But the risk is that a lot of these advertisers might discover new media channels and realize that those media channels work. And when the political the political cycle is over, all of that budget might not come back to TV OTA. That is the very real risk, as local advertisers have to find other media to reallocate their spend to. So that's another lens for which we are looking for things on our end.
Yeah, we've been seeing that. Once some of these advertisers move some of their budget, their media weight more into CTV and away from linear, it's like, well, that worked out pretty well, actually. maybe we should keep that mix and weight and weight CTV going forward. Well, this has been excellent. I really appreciate your thoughts and data and insights. Before we close out, I just want to give you each a chance to share any final thoughts about crowd out or any fascinating facts that we might look to expect to happen in this political season currently, or maybe even looking ahead to the general. Any kind of final thoughts? Sana, why don't we start with you?
Cool. Yeah. So again, as a whole, across all media, BI is forecasting non-political local advertising to grow by about 3.8% in 2026, excluding political advertising. So while there will definitely be some coding out and displacement within TV, OTA specifically, and the Supreme Court decision will accentuate that, the non-political advertising spend will continue growing, even if within low single-digit rate, because local advertisers will be looking for over media to reallocate spend. So that will still be happening. It's just watching for when the political cycle is over, what will be the impact of all of that as the dust settle.
Yep. Okay. John, any final thoughts?
I'll give you a thought and something I'm going to watch today. I think the thought here is I'm very excited to see where the digital CTV space ends up playing out at the end of this year, right? We saw it at about 21% for the presidential last year. We have it predicted at about 24, 25%. I'm curious, is that really the landing zone, or is there opportunity beyond that 25% really for them to take another step? It's curious because I do think their inventory approach is advancing. I think that there are more premium impressions on the digital space, but is there an opportunity for them to sort of push past that quarter of the overall spending? And then secondly, pay attention, there is an oral argument being held today. Some Democratic lawmakers are challenging the Supreme Court decision. It was fast-tracked, and the argument is being held today. In theory, it could overturn that ability, or at least pause that ability for LUR to be available to these party committees. I'm not a lawyer, so I have no idea, but I think organically and instinctively don't think it's going to change, but I do want to say that argument is happening today, and we'll certainly pay attention to what the outcome of that is.
Absolutely, yeah. And then we're now breaking on social video spending, and so CTV in our taxonomy is different from social video. CTV we call premium program length kind of content, and social video, Reels, Instagram, shorter form video. And that's become very popular. So we'll have some visibility perhaps into how political spending may move into the social video, the short form video, as well as the premium longer form CT video. So a couple of things could happen in the dynamics here. Thank you guys for really interesting insights into what's happening with political crowd out, different viewpoints, different data, different expectations. None of us are lawyers, but a lot of this is driven by what's happening with the courts. So what is true today may change given appeals or even different policy decisions that come up. So it's a dynamic space that we'll definitely keep our eyes on and share some views going forward. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. And we appreciate both the audience being here and, of course, our speakers, Todd, John, and Senan. For everyone listening, if you have any questions or suggestions, please get in touch with us. An easy way to do that is our email address, podcast@bia.com. We look forward to hearing from you. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we'd definitely like to take those into consideration and see what we can do for those as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the BIA Leading Local Insights podcast. Stay a part of our community by subscribing so you never miss an episode. And we want to hear from you. What topics do you want us to dive into next? Email your ideas to podcast@bia.com.